A citywide red alert gripped Viridia. Sirens wailed across every district, but their mechanical shrieks were utterly drowned out by the bizarre, horrific screeches echoing from the heavens. The sky had bled into a violent, fiery red. Fractures spiderwebbed across the atmosphere, cracks the populace had come to call gates. And pouring out from those abyssal tears were the beasts. Barely a few hours ago, 22-year-old Arthur had been sitting in his rundown apartment, watching the rain slap violently against his windowpane like a succession of open-handed slaps. And now? Now he was sprinting for his life down a desolate, pitch-black alleyway. Hard on his heels was a shadowhound, a monstrous canine easily the size of an SUV. Its eyes burned with a murderous, blood-red light, and a thick, shadowy black smog rolled off its hide. "Get the hell back! Stay away from me!" Arthur screamed, snatching up a discarded iron pipe. Spinning on his heel, he swung it with every ounce of strength he possessed, aiming straight for the beast's snout. Clang! The iron pipe collided violently with the hound's bared fangs and bent entirely out of shape. The beast didn't sustain so much as a scratch. Without missing a beat, it lunged, pouncing on Arthur in a single, fluid motion. SHRRRKKK. AFA. Arthur slammed hard into the concrete wall. His right arm was completely severed from the shoulder. Blood erupted from the jagged wound, and the sheer, agonizing force of the pain sent his vision spinning into darkness. He collapsed onto the cold ground. The shadowhound approached with slow, predatory deliberation, saliva dripping from its jaws, as if savoring the final moments of its prey. "Is this where I die? Like a piece of discarded trash?" Arthur thought, his eyelids growing heavy. He closed his eyes, bracing for the end. Right then, a stark, crystalline, mechanical voice resonated directly inside his mind. "Warning, host life status is critical. Global evolution system initialized. Survival quest triggered, kill the shadowhound or die. System note, human limitations cannot defeat the apocalypse. To survive, you must evolve." Arthur snapped his eyes open. Floating right in front of him was a glowing, obsidian holographic screen. The beast unhinged its jaws, lunging to tear him apart. Arthur had no time to think. The paralyzing fear of death suddenly snapped, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated madness. Utilizing his remaining left hand, he summoned every shred of strength he had left and thrust his bare arm straight down the beast's open, cavernous throat. The hound's razor-sharp fangs ripped into his flesh, but instead of pulling back, Arthur shoved his arm deeper and deeper, until his fingers clamped onto something fleshy, hot, and pulsating. It was the beast's core, its literal heart. With a desperate, violent wrench, Arthur tore it out. A glowing, dark purple crystal sat in his grip, still beating with malevolent energy. The shadowhound collapsed heavily onto the pavement, the light draining from its eyes until they turned completely cold. Arthur lay there gasping for air, drowning in his own blood. Target neutralized. 10 EXP gained. First kill reward, genetic integration option available. Do you want to assimilate the shadowhound core to repair your body? Yes/no. Warning, assimilation will permanently alter human biology. Yes. Yes. Do whatever the hell you want, just keep me alive. Arthur roared through the agonizing pain. The moment the word yes left his lips, the black crystal dissolved in his hand, liquefying into a dark fluid that poured directly into his open wounds. Ahawa! Arthur's agonizing shriek echoed through the entire length of the alleyway. This pain was 1,000 times more excruciating than the amputation itself. His severed right shoulder began to writhe and twitch. The sickening sounds of bones fracturing and reknitting shattered the air. But this time, it wasn't a human arm growing back. Coarse black fur, strange runic patterns, and dense, supernatural muscle fibers began bursting from the stump. Slowly, the severed limb transformed into a monstrous, sleek, and gleaming obsidian claw, cloned directly from the anatomy of the shadowhound. The talons on his new hand were sharper than combat knives. Arthur collapsed face first onto the ground, his breathing heavy and ragged. He stared at his new arm, it was the limb of a demon. The mechanical voice of the system chimed once more. Integration successful. Race, human, 90%/beast, 10%. New skill unlocked, Shadow Slash, Level 1, welcome to the new world, Evolver Arthur. Arthur pushed himself up, standing unsteadily on his feet. From beyond the confines of the alley, the chaotic screeches of even more beasts filled the night air. He clenched his monstrous black claw tight, staring into the encroaching darkness, and let a sharp smile creep onto his face. He had bartered away a piece of his humanity, but in exchange, he had forged the power to survive. Arthur flexed his newly formed shadow claw. The limb was visibly larger than his original human arm, its dense muscle fibers humming with a strange, foreign vibration. But the most shocking realization? The blinding pain was entirely gone. The core of the shadowhound had instantly cauterized and healed his wounds during the transformation. Stepping out of the alleyway, Arthur was met with a landscape of absolute devastation unfolding across the streets of Viridia. Cars lay crumpled in multi-vehicle collisions, black smoke billowed from collapsing high-rises, and those violent red fractures in the sky, the gates, were still actively spewing hordes of grotesque, nightmarish beasts. As Arthur cautiously advanced onto the main road, a fresh glowing prompt materialized before his eyes. Map function unlocked. Alert, 3 low-tier beasts detected within 100 meters. Objective, reach the nearest designated safe zone, the Sector 4 underground station. A safe zone? Arthur muttered under his breath. So, there are still people alive. A deafening explosion cut him off just a block away. The glass entrance of a nearby shopping mall shattered outward as 3 more shadow hounds burst through the debris. They were actively hunting a small, desperate group, 2 men and a young woman fleeing for their lives. Keep running. They're right on us, one of the men screamed, frantically hurling a fire extinguisher behind him. A hound ripped through the metal canister midair with a single, effortless swipe. In her panic, the girl tripped over the rubble, sending her crashing to the asphalt. Her ankle gave way with a sickening twist. Rohan! Don't leave me behind, she cried out. But Rohan and the other survivor sprinted forward, refusing to look back even once. The lead shadowhound lunged through the air toward the helpless girl, its slavering fangs inches from her face. She clamped her eyes shut, bracing for death. Shriyip! A crescent of deep, localized darkness sliced through the air. A spray of black blood erupted as the beast was cleanly bifurcated, its severed halves crashing heavily onto the pavement. The girl slowly opened her eyes. Standing before her was no savior, but a terrifying anomaly. A young man stood in the wreckage. One of his arms was completely ordinary, but the other was a monstrous, gleaming obsidian claw, still dripping with the beast's dark ichor. Arthur stared down at his newly altered limb. His first skill had executed flawlessly. Skill executed, Shadow Slash, Level 1. Target eliminated. 15 EXP gained. Seeing their packmate slaughtered, the remaining 2 shadow hounds growled in collective fury, shifting their predatory focus entirely onto Arthur. What are you?" the girl stammered, scrambling backward in sheer terror. She looked at Arthur with the exact same horror she had reserved for the monsters. Arthur didn't even grant her a glance. He drove his monstrous claw into the asphalt, shattering the solid concrete beneath his talons. "If you want to live, shut up and stay behind me," he said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. The last remnants of fear had completely burned away inside him. As the final 2 beasts pounced toward him in unison, a dark, unsettling smile crept onto Arthur's face. He finally understood the fundamental rule of this apocalyptic reality: show humanity, and you perish; embrace the beast, and you rule. Both shadowhounds lunged at Arthur simultaneously. Their speed was blinding, but Arthur felt as though his perception and reaction time had drastically accelerated. Inside his mind, the system's warnings flashed in rapid succession. Danger alert, left flank and front attack. Devoid of fear, Arthur used his ordinary left hand to shove the girl backward while throwing himself into a hard right dive. One beast sailed clean through the air right over him, but the second was already dead ahead, snapping its jaws. "Your turn," Arthur growled. He drove his monstrous shadow claw forward with devastating force, plunging it straight into the beast's throat. Under the sheer pressure of his talons, the hound's muscle and bone shattered like brittle clay. Crunch. Target eliminated. 15 EXP gained. The third beast, having missed its airborne strike, visibly recoiled. Even monsters understood fear. Staring at Arthur's altered form, it realized it wasn't fighting a helpless human, but an apex predator far more lethal than itself. The creature began to back away. "Don't bother running," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a freezing register. He whipped his claw through the air, Shadow Slash. A sharp crescent of localized dark energy erupted forward, tearing through the retreating hound and slicing it clean in half. Target eliminated. 15 EXP gained. Level up. You are now level 2. All stats increased. Human/beast ratio changed. Human, 88%/beast, 12%. Arthur felt a massive surge of raw power flood his veins, but with it came a chilling realization: the jagged, obsidian patterns on his claw had crept further up his arm, consuming his elbow and reaching toward his shoulder. His human half had eroded by another 2%. His eyes locked onto the 3 beast cores pulsating on the pavement. One by one, he scooped them up, crushing them effortlessly in his grip. His body hungrily absorbed the shattered crystals, causing the talons on his monstrous hand to grow noticeably longer and sharper. The girl, still sprawled on the ground, watched the display in sheer horror, her body trembling violently. You're consuming them?" Arthur walked over and pulled her to her feet without a word. "My name is Arthur. If you want to live, start moving. The safe zone is close." Wiping away her tears, she stammered, "And my name is Rachel." A short while later, the two arrived at the entrance of the Sector 4 underground station. The area had been heavily fortified with makeshift barricades, guarded by local police officers and a handful of armed civilians. Inside the subterranean station, hundreds of displaced citizens huddled together in terror. The moment Arthur and Rachel approached the perimeter, an officer instantly raised his rifle, aiming it directly at Arthur's chest. "Halt! Stay right there. Put your hands up." Panic rippled through the crowd as the civilians caught sight of Arthur's terrifying obsidian claw. The entire safe zone erupted into frantic shouting. "It's a monster. No, he's a mutator. Don't let him inside. He'll slaughter us all. Rohan and his companion, the very men who had abandoned Rachel to die, were standing near the front of the crowd. Seeing Arthur alive, and in this terrifying new form, left Rohan completely paralyzed with shock. Rachel immediately threw herself in front of Arthur. No, wait. Stop. He saved my life. If it weren't for him, I'd be dead. The police officer's hands shook against his weapon, his knuckles white. I don't care. That thing isn't human. We can't allow a mutator into this sanctuary when he's clearly turning into a beast. Arthur looked past the barrels of the guns, staring at the sea of faces. Their eyes held nothing but raw terror and unadulterated hatred. The very people who had been ordinary humans just like him yesterday now viewed him as a monster, a piece of trash to be discarded. Suddenly, the cold mechanical voice of the system chimed inside his head once more, but this time, the holographic text flared a violent, blood-red hue. Urgent scenario triggered, the first wave. A mid-tier boss beast, Ironhide Minotaur, has detected a large gathering of humans. Arrival time, 2 minutes. System advice, the human barricade will turn into a slaughterhouse. Will you protect the humans who reject you, or use them as bait? Arthur stared at the fortified gates of the safe zone, then slowly turned his head. From the dark horizon, a deafening, catastrophic roar tore through the sky, the sheer acoustic force causing the very ground beneath their feet to shudder. Roar! The very earth shuddered. Ripping through the asphalt of the main road just outside the Sector 4 underground station, a terrifying, 10-foot-tall monstrosity materialized. It possessed the hulking, muscular torso of a bull, yet reared up and walked on 2 massive legs. Its skin was an impenetrable, iron-like obsidian hide, and in its grip, it carelessly swung a heavy concrete pillar like a mere plaything, the Ironhide Minotaur. A monster! F-for-E, the police officer shrieked in absolute terror, his finger locking onto the trigger. Rat-tat-tat-tat. A hail of bullets rained down upon the Minotaur, only to spark and bounce off its metallic hide like useless pebbles. Enraged by the annoyance, the beast swung its concrete pillar in a sweeping arc, shattering the fortified barricade in a single, devastating blow. 3 or 4 guards were launched into the air, thrown aside like ragdolls. Complete hysteria erupted at the entrance of the safe zone. The crowd devolved into a stampede, trampling over one another in a desperate bid to claw their way inside the subterranean bunker. Rachel collapsed to the ground, paralyzed by fear, but Arthur stood his ground. Before his eyes, the system interface flashed a violent warning. Boss Beast, Ironhide Minotaur, Level 8, detected. Warning, your current level is too low for a direct head-on clash. Arthur let out a cold, detached chuckle, staring at his glowing shadow claw. Who said anything about a head-on fight? Let them wear it out first. Rohan, who had been sprinting at the absolute front of the fleeing crowd, tripped over the debris and came crashing down right at Arthur's feet. Arthur! Save me! Please, you have powers now, he whimpered, desperately groveling. Arthur stared down at Rohan, the very coward who had left Rachel behind to be slaughtered. Bending down, Arthur gripped him by the collar and casually shoved him back toward the chaos. You abandoned your humanity, I simply altered my body. Carve your own path out of this. The Minotaur was now breaching the threshold of the safe zone, its predatory focus entirely locked onto the dense mass of fleeing humans. In its single-minded pursuit, it had completely exposed its back to Arthur. There's my opening, Arthur thought. His systemic brain calibrated the strike with cold, predatory precision. Target's back exposed. Weak spot, unarmored neck joint. Activating skill, Shadow Slash, Level 1, plus 12% beast power buff. Arthur vanished into the shadows, his speed explosive. Leaping off the ground, he planted his foot firmly onto a nearby lamppost, using the leverage to launch himself directly onto the Minotaur's broad back. His terrifying obsidian claw cut through the air. Shriyip! Grrrrrah! The Minotaur roared in sheer agony. Arthur's talons tore clean through the monster's iron-like hide, causing thick, boiling black blood to erupt from the deep fissure. But the boss beast reacted instantly. Spinning around with terrifying momentum, it backhanded Arthur with its massive arm mid-air. The force of the impact launched Arthur across the street, slamming him hard into a parked car. The chassis crumpled instantly under the force of the collision, and a spray of blood erupted from Arthur's lips. Warning, HP dropped by 40%. Beast instinct overriding, rage mode activated. Arthur pushed himself out of the crushed metal. His mind no longer processed the concept of pain, it was entirely consumed by an insatiable hunger to hunt. The dark shroud of mist radiating from his claw crept upward, bleeding into his eyes until his gaze burned with a terrifying, luminescent purple glow. Devoid of fear, he lunged at the Minotaur once more. This time, his velocity had doubled. The Minotaur swung its massive concrete pillar in a deadly arc, but Arthur slid smoothly underneath the strike, springing upward to bury his razor-sharp talons directly into the beast's already ruptured throat. Crunch! With a violent, visceral twist of his arm, Arthur tore the Minotaur's throat wide open from the inside. Clamped tightly within his blood-drenched claw was a massive, brilliant, steel-gray boss core. The Minotaur's colossal frame collapsed heavily onto the asphalt, sending a tremor rippling through the entire street. Inside the safe zone, the very civilians who had just branded Arthur a monster fell into a deathly silence. Their eyes were wide, frozen in sheer disbelief. The very outcast they had tried to cast away had single-handedly slaughtered the apocalypse at their doorstep. Arthur stood panting heavily, staring down at the massive steel core pulsing in his hand. The primal hunger gnawing at his stomach was now entirely beyond his control. Without a second thought, he clenched his claw and crushed the core into shards. Mid-tier boss eliminated. 200 EXP gained. Level up. Level up. You are now level 5. Major mutation triggered, Ironhide integration. Human/beast ratio changed, human, 75%/beast, 25%. Arthur's agonizing scream echoed louder and more monstrous than before. Jagged, metallic, iron-like plates began erupting over his obsidian arm, expanding rapidly across his shoulder and plating his chest in heavy armor. Even his facial structure shifted, his jawline sharpening into a lethal, hard angle, and his eyes hardening into something predatory. He was now 25% monster. Arthur slowly turned his gaze toward the gates, staring at the huddled mass of humans who were now trembling in unadulterated terror. He had saved them, yes, but to the eyes of the sheep, he was no longer a shepherd. He was a god, and a demon all the same. The metallic plates inherited from the Ironhide Minotaur gleamed heavily across Arthur's form. 25% of his physical biology had now fully mutated into that of a beast. Inside the perimeter of the safe zone, the civilians, the trembling police officer, and Rohan stood locked in a deathly silence, as if the very air had been sucked from their lungs. The police officer slowly lowered his rifle, his knuckles still twitching against the steel barrel. You actually slaughtered it?" Arthur swept his sharp, luminescent gaze across the gathered crowd. In their eyes, any inkling of gratitude was entirely choked out by absolute, primal terror. He knew right then that even if he stepped inside the sanctuary, these people would never accept him as one of their own. To them, he would always be a ticking time bomb, a monster waiting for the inevitable moment to snap. "Arthur." Rachel took a tentative step forward, her voice straining as she shifted her weight off her injured ankle. "Aren't you coming inside with us?" Arthur looked down at his altered hand, now a terrifying fusion of obsidian shadow and armored, metallic plates. "My place is no longer inside a cage, Rachel. I can't hunt efficiently while surrounded by sheep." Right on cue, the cold, mechanical chime of the system resonated inside his mind. World event notification: the first awakening has concluded. Global leaderboard initialized. Current rank of host in Viridia City, rank 1, danger alert, high-tier gates will manifest in the central district in 24 hours. A cold, razor-sharp smile played on Arthur's lips. Rank 1. But to maintain his absolute apex status on the leaderboard, he was going to need a massive influx of mutated cores. "Wait!" Rohan yelled from deep within the barricade, his initial terror rapidly converting into desperate greed. "If you're going out there into the wild, at least leave us some weapons or those monster crystals. You're already overpowered, you can easily harvest more." Arthur paused, casting a backward glance so utterly freezing it choked the breath right out of Rohan's throat. A faint, menacing wisp of dark smog rolled off Arthur's talons. "If you ever cross my path again, you will be the very first thing I hunt." Turning his back on the sanctuary, Arthur strode out into the desolate, pitch-black streets of Viridia, where the distant, horrific shrieks of encroaching beasts echoed off the skyscrapers. As he walked, his silhouette gradually dissolved into the thick, dark smog clinging to the asphalt. Rachel stood frozen at the threshold of the safe zone, her eyes locked onto the spot where he had vanished. A cold realization washed over her: huddled behind these flimsy barricades with cowards, survival was nothing but an illusion. If she wanted to endure this brutal new reality, she would have to find a way to follow the monster. Arthur was entirely alone now, embraced by the dying city's shadows. Ahead lay colossal monsters, cataclysmic high-tier gates, and the slow, inevitable erosion of his remaining humanity. But the predator inside him had fully awakened, and the hunt had officially begun. Viridia City's central district had devolved into a complete ghost town. The landscape was choked with the wreckage of crushed vehicles, shattered glass, and streaks of boiling black blood staining the asphalt. In the sky above, the crimson fractures had expanded significantly, yawning wide as if waiting to swallow the entire metropolis whole. Arthur sat perched on the precipice of a ruined rooftop, silently observing his left-hand claw, which now caught the light with the heavy, metallic sheen of his inherited Ironhide plates. With a thought, he summoned his interface. Status window, level, 5, EXP, 45 500ths, race, human, 75%/beast, 25%. Skills, Shadow/LV2, Iron Shield, passive, LV1. The next level up isn't going to be easy, Arthur mused. Right then, his mutated auditory senses picked up the faint, ragged sound of labored breathing from far below. A set of dragging, hesitant footsteps was gradually advancing toward his position. Arthur dropped from the rooftop in a silent descent, melting into the shadows behind a jackknifed truck. Wisps of localized dark energy began to coil around his talons. A figure emerged from the enveloping darkness. She was gasping for air, her clothes caked in dust and dried blood, desperately clutching a rusted iron rod. It was Rachel. Her injured ankle still caused her to limp noticeably. "I told you not to follow me," Arthur's voice cut through the dark, dropping to a freezing register. Any ordinary survivor would have bolted at the sight of his monstrous silhouette, but Rachel froze in her tracks. Rachel looked up, meeting Arthur's luminescent purple gaze. "The safe zone, it isn't safe anymore, Arthur. Shortly after you left, another wave hit. Rohan and the others only cared about saving their own skins. If I had stayed behind, I would have been slaughtered." Arthur stepped closer, his shadow completely enveloping her. His physical stature was now visibly taller than an ordinary human's, radiating a wild, predatory aura. "This isn't a game, Rachel. I'm not roaming these streets to play the savior. I am here to hunt. To me, you are nothing but a liability." Rachel tightened her grip on the iron rod, her knuckles turning white. Fear swirled in her eyes, but it was entirely eclipsed by a stubborn, desperate will to survive. "I won't be a liability. I know you consume the monster cores. Let me harvest them from the carcasses for you so you can focus entirely on the fight. Just let me ride your coattails? I just want to survive." Arthur stared her down in absolute silence. The predatory beast within urged him to discard her or strike her down right here, but the remaining 75% of his human biology held its ground. Suddenly, the cold, mechanical chime of the system broke the silence, echoing in both their minds. "Alert, a pack of acid-spitting crawlers, level 4, is approaching. Count, 5 beasts. Distance, 50 meters." Grotesque, insectoid monstrosities began seething out from the fissures in the asphalt, hissing as highly corrosive green acid dripped from their mandibles. The surrounding concrete hissed and melted wherever the liquid struck. Arthur clenched his metallic, obsidian claw, casting a cold sideways glance at Rachel. "Fine. If you can survive this ambush without a single shred of assistance from me, you can follow. Consider this your first and final trial." Without another word, Arthur vanished, lunging toward the oncoming crawlers like a bolt of dark lightning. Arthur plunged into the midst of the acid-spitting crawlers like a hunting tempest. He instantly activated his new passive skill, Iron Shield. When the highly corrosive green acid splashed against the heavy metallic plates armoring his left arm, it merely sizzled away into harmless steam without corroding his flesh. Shriyip! Arthur's shadow slash executed in a flash, cleaving 2 of the crawlers clean down the middle. Their glowing green, acidic ichor erupted across the shattered pavement. However, seeing Arthur occupied with the slaughter, one of the remaining 3 crawlers pivoted sharply, shifting its predatory gaze entirely toward Rachel. Its mandibles unhinged, preparing to unleash a torrent of boiling acid. "Rachel!" Arthur called out, though he deliberately kept his distance. He wanted to see if she truly possessed the grit to survive on her own. Rachel's heart hammered violently against her ribs. Death was staring her dead in the eye, but this time, she refused to run. She had already witnessed what happened to cowards like Rohan when they fled. Channeling every ounce of desperation and strength she had left, she swung her iron rod, driving it straight down the crawler's open, cavernous maw. Shrrrk. The monster's volatile acid instantly began liquefying the rusted iron, but the rod had already skewered its throat. Thrashing in sheer agony, the crawler lashed out with its razor-sharp legs, slicing deep into Rachel's arm. She crashed to the asphalt, her arm drenched in blood, but she successfully managed to kick the flailing beast away from her. The crawler wasn't dead yet. It reared back to deliver a final, fatal strike. Refusing to back down, Rachel reached out with her uninjured hand and desperately clamped her fingers onto a glowing acid core pulsing inside the carcass of one of the monsters Arthur had already slaughtered. The moment her skin made contact with the crystal, a brilliant, golden system interface flared directly before her eyes. Emergency awakening conditions met. Compatibility check, 92%, support/enhancer class. Unique trait unlocked, poison resistance, LVU1. First weapon generated, acid-etched dagger. The monster core dissolved right into Rachel's palm. Unlike Arthur, however, her physical body did not undergo a monstrous mutation. Her path was entirely different. She had awakened as a weapon and skill summoner. A sleek, radiant dagger humming with vibrant green energy materialized in her grip. "Die, you piece of trash!" Rachel screamed, plunging the glowing dagger straight through the skull of the wounded crawler. Boom! The beast's head detonated into a shower of acidic gore. Panting heavily, Rachel watched as the deep lacerations on her arm began to slowly knit back together, catalyzed by her newly acquired poison resistance. A final, decisive tearing sound echoed through the street. Arthur had cleanly dismantled the remaining crawlers. He strode over to Rachel, his luminescent purple eyes locking onto the glowing green dagger in her hand and the residual gold aura fading from her user interface. System note, a fellow companion has awakened. Team function unlocked. Logged, player Rachel, level 1. Arthur slowly relaxed his massive obsidian claw, a rare look of genuine respect crossing his predatory features. "You didn't break. And your system, you aren't mutating. You can grow powerful while retaining your humanity." Rachel offered a weak, trembling smile, still catching her breath. "I told you. I won't be a liability. Arthur scooped up the remaining monster cores from the pavement, crushing them into his armored palm. Fine. From here on out, we aren't just surviving. A high-tier gate is opening in the Central District tomorrow, and we need a hell of a lot more power if we're going to slaughter the boss. Let's begin the real hunt. The Apex Galleria Mall, standing dead center in the Central District, no longer resembled a shopping hub. Instead, the entire structure had been overtaken by grotesque, crimson organic tissues and pulsating monster veins, making the building look like the beating heart of some colossal behemoth. The continuous, echoing shrieks leaking from the interior made it painfully clear that this place had transformed into a massive mutant nest. Arthur and Rachel stood before the shattered remnants of the main glass entrance. Inside Arthur's mind, the system prompt flashed a violent, warning red. Dungeon warning, you are entering a D-rank mutant nest. Recommendation, minimum party level 15. Your average party level, 3, objective, eliminate the Nest Queen to stop the outbreak. It's a level 15 warning, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a cold register. Wisps of purplish smog leaked from his metallic, obsidian claw. Rachel, there's still time. You can wait outside. Rachel tightened her grip on the radiant acid-etched dagger in her hand. The fear in her eyes had completely vanished, replaced by the hardened confidence of a true warrior. I told you, I won't be a liability. Level is just a number. We have something they don't, a brain. Arthur let out a sharp, dark smile as he took a step forward. That's exactly what the beast inside me wanted to hear. Let's go. The moment they stepped into the main atrium, they were met with a sight that would freeze anyone's blood. Thousands of pulsating eggs were clustered across the broken escalators and storefronts, with agile shadows writhing out from them, spidery ravagers. These aberrations possessed 8 skittering legs, but their faces were distorted into the horrific semblance of a human countenance. Screech! More than a dozen spidery ravagers spotted them simultaneously and dropped from the ceiling in a frenzied swarm. Rachel, stay behind me and clear the stragglers. Arthur roared, throwing himself directly into the center of the horde. Activating Iron Shield, the heavy metallic plates over his arm expanded like a protective bulwark. 2 monsters lunged at him, but their razor-sharp legs snapped instantly upon colliding with his armored skin. Without wasting a single heartbeat, Arthur swept his massive claw through the air. Shadow Slash, Level 2. Shriyip. A massive, crescent wave of localized darkness cleaved through the air, cleanly bifurcating 4 monsters at once. A deluge of foul yellow ichor erupted across the floor. Suddenly, a ravager leapt from Arthur's blind spot, aiming directly for his exposed back. Before it could land, Rachel moved like a flash of green lightning, driving her glowing dagger straight into the monster's skull. The weapon's volatile acid instantly liquefied the beast's brain. Companion Rachel eliminated a target. Shared EXP granted, 20 EXP. Not bad, Arthur growled, his predatory rage surging violently. As he slaughtered monster after monster, the dark, jagged lines of his claw crept further up his arm, beginning to stain his neck. His velocity and raw power were multiplying by the second. The two fought like a perfectly calibrated machine. Arthur absorbed the brunt of the onslaught, crushing the front lines, while Rachel moved seamlessly around him, delivering lethal finishing blows. Within minutes, the floor was littered with the carcasses of the spidery ravagers. Dozens of glowing monster cores illuminated the wreckage. Arthur began crushing them one by one, absorbing their energy. 150 EXP gained. Level up. You are now level 6. Human/beast ratio, human, 70%/beast, 30%. New skill unlocked, Beast Roar, LV1, induces fear in enemies below your level. Arthur's frame grew visibly broader, and heavy iron spikes erupted from the metallic plating of his obsidian claw. He was now undeniably 30% monster. Right then, a deafening, cataclysmic shriek tore down from the highest floor of the mall, the sheer acoustic force shaking the very structural pillars of the building. The remaining glass panes of the skylight shattered, raining down in a deadly torrent. From the deepest shadows of the upper level, a massive silhouette began to emerge. Its eyes burned with a murderous, fiery red light, and its elongated limbs ended in colossal black talons, the Nest Queen. Arthur looked up, his luminescent purple eyes locking onto the threat as he clenched his spiked claw. Looks like the real prey has finally shown itself. Screech! The Nest Queen's piercing shriek fractured the remaining structural pillars of the mall. She resembled a horrific, 8-legged arachnid, but her upper torso was that of a 15-foot-tall, dark-skinned aberration. Her 8 compound eyes burned like smoldering embers, and in place of hands, her elongated limbs terminated in 2 massive, sword-like blade arms. Leaping directly from the second-floor balcony into the atrium, her colossal weight shattered the concrete floor upon impact. Boss target locked, the Nest Queen, level 12. Danger rank, lethal. Rachel, don't back down. This thing is nothing like the ones before. Arthur roared, though his voice had completely lost its human timbre, replaced instead by a deep, guttural growl vibrating from his chest. Without wasting a single breath, the Nest Queen brought her lethal blade arms down toward Arthur. He instantly crossed his limbs in defense, Iron Shield. Sparks. The queen's razor-sharp talons collided violently with Arthur's metallic claw and the armored plates protecting his chest. The sheer, kinetic force of the impact drove him 10 feet backward, his boots carving deep furrows into the solid concrete. Spiderweb cracks shot across his metallic chest plates. GGRRRR. Arthur growled in fury, unleashing his newly acquired skill, Beast Roar. A localized shockwave, echoing the primal fury of an apex predator, erupted from his throat, shattering every remaining glass pane in the mall. The queen's 8 skittering legs locked up for a fraction of a second as institutional terror gripped her mind. There's my window, Arthur thought. Melting into the environment like a shifting shadow, he closed the distance and drove his claw down onto one of the queen's legs. Shadow slash. Crunch. One of the queen's thick, armored limbs was severed entirely, unleashing a torrent of foul, fetid ichor. But she was a boss monster for a reason, she would not fall so easily. Utilizing her remaining momentum, she delivered a brutal, heavy kick straight into Arthur's chest. Boom! Arthur was launched through the air, crashing hard into the ruins of a collapsed storefront. A spray of blood erupted from his throat, and his user interface began flashing a frantic, systemic red. Warning, HP is at 30%. Critical damage. System notification, to instantly heal and unlock 100% power, increase beast integration to 50%. Warning, at 50% integration, human consciousness will permanently degrade by half. Arthur lay gasping amid the rubble, his chest heaving. A desperate internal conflict tore through him. Do I surrender my humanity? Just to win? If he allowed himself to become 50% monster, would he even recognize Rachel? Or would he turn around and slaughter her too? Arthur, don't you dare give up. Rachel's voice shattered his spiraling thoughts. Arthur looked up to see her sprinting headlong toward the monstrosity. The queen caught the movement and swung her secondary blade arm in a lethal arc, executing a perfectly timed, desperate dive. Rachel felt the blade whistle bare inches over her head before she scrambled to Arthur's side. Her arm was bleeding heavily, yet her eyes held no intention of breaking. Grasping her acid-etched dagger in a reverse grip, her golden system interface flared brilliantly. Skill activated, companion link, skill overclock. Transferring skill buff, acidic weapon coating dash allied target. Arthur, this is the very last of my energy. Touch your claw to my dagger. Rachel screamed. Without a second thought, Arthur thrust his massive, metallic obsidian claw forward. The moment his hand made contact with her radiant green dagger, a localized energy resonance exploded between them. Rachel's summoned weapon dissolved completely, liquefying into a volatile, boiling green acid that rapidly coiled around Arthur's dark arm. Flickering green acidic flames now intertwined seamlessly with his dark shadow aura. It was a flawless synergy of their unique abilities, an acid shadow overdrive. Unprecedented synergy detected. Temporary mutation triggered, venomous shadow claw. Attack power multiplied by 300%. AFA. A catastrophic tide of raw, unadulterated power flooded Arthur's veins, pushing his control to its absolute limits. The luminescent purple of his eyes bled into a shifting, volatile mixture of dark green and violet. Sensing the sudden, lethal shift in the air, the Nest Queen instinctively attempted to skitter backward. But it was already too late. Arthur moved like a tempest. His velocity was so extreme he visually vanished from the air, reappearing a fraction of a second later directly above the queen's head. Bringing both hands down with catastrophic force, he aimed straight for her face. Acid Shadow Slash. SHRRRRRKKKKKKKBOOM. A devastating shockwave of dark shadows and highly corrosive green acid tore through the atrium. The strike did not merely obliterate the Nest Queen's head, the residual energy wave dissolved the concrete pillars and structural walls directly behind her into a molten slurry. The queen's colossal 15-foot frame went entirely limp, crashing heavily onto the ruined floor. An absolute, ringing silence descended upon them all. Arthur collapsed onto his knees, his breathing heavy and ragged. His claw hissed as the residual acid slowly dripped off, and his eyes still burned with a volatile green light. He turned his head slowly toward Rachel, his gaze wild and untamed, as if he were struggling to recognize her. Rachel didn't flinch. Stepping calmly through the debris, she walked right up to him and gently placed her ordinary human hand over his trembling, metallic armor plates. Arthur, it's over. We won. That single anchor of human contact seemed to break the beast's hold. The volatile green drained from his eyes, returning to their stable, glowing purple hue. He let out a long, exhausted breath. Right then, a massive, flawless emerald green crystal materialized from the queen's dissolving carcass, floating gently in the air. Simultaneously, a resounding system notification echoed through the entire zone. D-rank mutant nest, cleared. 1000 EXP granted to party. Player Arthur level up. Level up. You are now level 9. Player Rachel level up. You are now level 4. Reward, unique blueprint drop, the genetic stabilizer. Arthur stared at the floating holographic screen, his breathing slowly stabilizing. The genetic stabilizer? A flicker of hope ignited within him. Did this mean he had finally found a way to forge absolute power without erasing the remaining remnants of his humanity? The moment the Nest Queen drew her final breath, the grotesque crimson tissues suffocating the Galleria Mall dissolved, liquefying into an oily, black sludge. Arthur and Rachel stood at the threshold of the shattered exit, the color instantly draining from their faces as they looked toward the heavens. The 24-hour countdown had reached zero. Boom! An apocalyptic detonation rent the air, triggering a violent tremor that convulsed the entirety of Viridia City. The once minor fracture splitting the sky over the central district ruptured violently, expanding into a cataclysmic, 2-kilometer-long canyon of bleeding obsidian and crimson light, the Colossal Gate. As the abyssal tear yawned open, the last remnants of azure blue were choked from the sky, plunging the world into a suffocating, end-of-days despair. Suddenly, the chilling blare of a systemic warning echoed uniformly across the entire metropolis, resonating not as a mere alarm, but as a definitive death sentence. Emergency alert, Calamity Class Gate activated. Boss Beast descending, the Ash-Winged Wyvern, level 25. Status, Calamity. Current human survival probability, 0.04%. 0.04%. Rachel whispered, her fingers trembling so violently she nearly dropped her dagger. The low-level beasts that had been skittering through the surrounding ruins immediately scrambled back into the deepest subterranean fissures. The apex predator of predators had arrived. Two monolithic wings burning with volcanic embers erupted from the threshold of the gate. A colossal, 50-foot-tall dragon-type leviathan clad in charcoal and crimson scales, the ash-winged wyvern, slipped into the sky, exhaling clouds of boiling ash and systemic flame. It unleashed a solitary, catastrophic roar, the sheer acoustic force shattering 3 adjacent skyscrapers, causing them to collapse into dust-like houses of cards. Row error! The wyvern's burning gaze instantly locked onto the entrance of the mall, zeroing in on the dense concentration of high-level energy radiating from Arthur and Rachel. Folding its wings, it plummeted toward them like a falling meteor. Rachel, run! Arthur roared, using his unmutated left arm to shove her with maximum force toward the structural safety of the mall's reinforced basement pillars. Spinning back toward the descending doom, Arthur bared his talons. His level 9 physique was already 30% beast, but against this bringer of calamity, he looked like a mere insect. Stealing his resolve, he forced 2 abilities to execute simultaneously, Iron Shield, plus, Beast Roar. Boom! With a casual, contemptuous sweep of its massive wing, the wyvern shattered the armored plates of Arthur's Iron Shield into brittle shards. The kinetic backshock launched Arthur backward, plowing his body through 50 meters of solid asphalt. His right shoulder shattered under the impact, and his user interface strobed a frantic, blinding red. Warning, HP dropped to 15%. Critical internal organ damage. System note, death is imminent. Do you want to force 50% beast integration to survive? Danger, 50% integration will permanently erase your human identity. Arthur lay broken in the crater, coughing up a mouthful of dark blood. He stared up at the harbinger of death hovering above, its maw already unhinging to unleash a torrent of incinerating fire. Is this where the line ends? He thought bitterly. If I embrace the 50% threshold, Arthur ceases to exist. But if I refuse, I die right here. Arthur. The core. Use the blueprint. Rachel's desperate scream cut through the din. She had dragged herself from the structural debris, holding aloft the flawless emerald green core they had harvested from the Nest Queen. A jolt of clarity struck Arthur's fading consciousness. The hidden reward, the genetic stabilizer blueprint. Summoning the absolute last of his strength, he slammed his uninjured left hand against the floating holographic prompt. Crafting requirement, 1 high-tier mutant core plus 100% host willpower. Do you want to craft the genetic stabilizer? Yes/no. Yes. Craft it now. Arthur roared within the confines of his mind. Rachel hurled the flawless crystal through the air. Mid-flight, the core dissolved into a radiant, golden-green liquid light, streaking across the distance to bury itself directly into Arthur's chest. Aah! Arthur's shriek tore through the ruined streets, but it was no longer a cry of agony, it was the triumphant roar of a new evolution. Inside his biology, the warring strands of beast and human DNA suddenly snapped into perfect, harmonious alignment. The jagged metallic plates along his left claw smoothed out, fusing seamlessly with his skin to form a polished, seamless set of badass dragon-scale armor. The dangerous mutation ratio halted instantly, but his baseline metrics multiplied exponentially. Genetic stabilizer successfully applied. Evolution path fixed, the ascended predator, humanity retained at 70%. Hidden skill unlocked, Dragon Slayer / LVU1. Level up. Level up. You are now level 12. Arthur stood up from the wreckage, a tempest of gold and obsidian energy radiating from his form, causing the surrounding debris to levitate into the air. His shattered shoulder reknitted instantly. His eyes, once a volatile purple, now blazed with a brilliant, predatory gold. He had shattered the fundamental rules of the system. Sensing the sudden rise of this lethal aura, the wyvern unleashed a colossal fireball, intending to reduce the entire central district to ash. Rachel. Buff me. Arthur commanded. Rachel swept her dagger through the air without a moment's delay, skill overclock, acidic weapon coating. A cyclone of vibrant green energy swirled forward, coiling tightly around Arthur's newly forged Dragonclaw. Acid, shadow, and golden cosmic energy fused into a singular, devastating cocktail of destruction. Arthur planted his heel and leaped, the explosive force fracturing 20 feet of concrete beneath him. He rocketed into the sky, flying straight toward the heart of the descending fireball. Dragonslayer slash. SHRRRRRIPPPPPPPPBOOMMMM. A catastrophic aerial detonation parted the sky, slicing the wyvern's massive fireball clean in half. While cascading torrents of flame rained down onto the ruined city blocks, Arthur ripped through the smoke, appearing directly in front of the beast. Terrified, the wyvern violently swept its wings forward to crush the intruder, but Arthur vaulted over the strike, embedding his reinforced talons deep beneath the creature's armored scales. Sprinting up the wyvern's broad spine, he reached its massive head in a heartbeat. "This city is my hunting ground, not yours," Arthur growled. Gathering the residual acid and golden energy into his fists, he drove his entire claw straight into the center of the wyvern's skull. Crunchunch! The wyvern unleashed a final, agonizing shriek as thick, black blood erupted from its jaws instead of fire. The massive, 50-foot behemoth lost all momentum, falling out of the sky and crashing violently onto the main road of Sector 4, kicking up a colossal shroud of dust and debris. As the dust slowly settled, Arthur stood atop the carcass of the fallen Calamity. Clutched firmly in his claw was a massive, brilliantly glowing, Calamity-class red core. His wounds were fully healed, and his golden eyes gleamed like twin stars through the darkness. Rachel emerged from the ruins, catching her breath, a victorious smile breaking across her face. Together, they had slaughtered the world's very first Calamity boss. Right then, a system notification flashed before the eyes of every surviving human across the globe, materializing in front of Arthur in bold text. Calamity-class gate, closed. Global leaderboard update, player Arthur is now world rank 1. Warning, the apocalypse has just begun. More high-tier gates will open across the world in Season 2. Arthur tightened his grip, crushing the massive red core into fragments, allowing its raw energy to flood his veins. He looked up at the sky, where faint fissures still rippled against the dark horizon. The world had irrevocably changed, and the monsters had arrived, but humanity now possessed a predator far more terrifying than the apocalypse. Season 1 end.